Cool. Thank you guys for joining us. This is kind of a last minute add-on session. Earlier this week, we spoke to Mike Selden of Finless Foods, and he said that, we were talking about, the goldfish experiment, which we'll talk to you guys about in just a second. But he said, you got to talk to Alan. And so Alan, welcome. Here we are.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks for inviting me.
Please tell us a little bit about your background and California Cultured.
Sure. I'm Alan Perlstein. I am a scientist entrepreneur. I've been working in the food tech and biopharma industry for the last 20 years. I started off my career working in a tiny little lab in Bayshore, Long Island, working to create cell-cultured fish in Morris Benjaminson's lab quite a while ago.
Awesome. And tell us about what you're doing now, and really what California Cultured is. A little bit separate from the Benjaminson work, but tell us a little bit about the startup.
Sure. So at California Cultured, we are growing cell-cultured chocolate using plant cell suspension culture technology.
Awesome. And I was able to try a sample and it really blew me out of the water. But, oftentimes we might say like, okay, we understand why we're going after cell cultured meat, but what are the benefits and what are the main reasons to go after cell cultured chocolate?
It has some similar issues with sustainability, ethics, as well as human and animal rights. Right now, what's happening in Africa, where roughly 70 to 75% of all the world's chocolate is mass produced. It's currently grown in many tropical areas where the forest used to be, and many really bad incentives have basically forced the industry to be really destructive, clear-cutting many hundreds of thousands of acres of forest to grow chocolate. And because chocolate is such a low value commodity crop in many areas of Africa, they use really inexpensive labor. And that also incentivizes forced child labor as well, with sort of the worst environmental and labor practices.
Clearly, a lot of huge benefits. And so it's definitely exciting to see that we could bring that technology to chocolate making as well. So I wanted to kind of, get back to the Benjaminson studies. And I have, the abstract from one of the original publications. Now, this one dates back to 2002. And I'll just read maybe the first one or two lines just to kind of give a little bit more perspective to the audience. But this publication was in vitro edible muscle protein production systems, MPPS, stage 1 fish. And the abstract really just starts off with the working efficiency of and state of mind of space vehicle crew on long-term missions is dependent on the sustainable and living conditions, including food. Our purpose was to establish the feasibility of an in vitro muscle protein production system, or what they're calling MPPS, for the fabrication of surrogate muscle protein constructs as food products for space travelers. So it's really directly relevant to everything that we're talking about here at CMS Astro. Tell us a little bit more about your involvement.
Oh, well, surprisingly, I was looking for an organic chemistry class, and that campus happened to have a great professor that I really enjoyed. And I remember sort of wandering outside the class, and I saw this little notice on the wall where this professor was looking for some students to help with one of their NASA projects and to continue some of the work going on what they called on their MPPS system. It was definitely very curious. I sort of emailed the professor Dr. Benjaminson and James Gilchrist. James Gilchrist was actually my bio 101 professor quite a while ago. So that's sort of where I got my connection to them. And once I found out that they were actually attempting to grow cell cultured fish, my mind was blown, and I sort of jumped off the deep end, learning every single thing I could about this. Was pretty little. Not that many scientists were really doing anything about it. There was maybe some books in science fiction and some theoretical articles, but the amount of practical information was uh, was not there. The only papers that existed that showed sort of any type of work happening was roughly over 100 years ago, where after the turn of the century, one of the first scientists were working on cell cultured chicken tissue as a Dr. Carroll in Rockefeller Institute, like such a long time ago. And there were some papers claiming that they had chicken meat and tissue being prolonged for years, and that was sort of this interesting story that people were trying to build something on, but we think it was maybe a not good understanding of some of the processes that were happening, or it was maybe even false, because not that many people saw it after people claimed they grew it. So it was almost part of the mythology of cell cultured meat. And we were trying to sort of take some inklings of mythology and science and actually validate and to show how we could maybe even improve upon it, and it has some validity to scale.
Now, when you first kind of saw that flyer, had you heard about the study before that or no?
No, absolutely not. It was a tiny study. Only a handful of scientists, maybe in the field, heard about it. That it was maybe a little bit of attention in Japanese TV and some foreign TV stations that were looking for interesting stories. There was a couple of like articles in some magazines, but that was sort of the extent of it. It was seen as almost uh, purely science fiction and purely like embryonic, truly embryonic attempt to take a swing at cell culture meat.
Wow. And so you joined maybe a couple of years after that initial publication.
Yeah,
What kind of happened with the ongoing research? Did it kind of continue for a couple of years after that?
it was really hard to get funding. It was, I think they tried like half a dozen times for many different grants, and yeah, that too exploratory for many of these other institutions. After a couple of years, they were thinking about starting a company and starting to talk with some investors, and like no one wanted to ever touch this. The only people that ever wanted to talk to us at all were like maybe some groups in the UN, and that's it, or some specialists, and that's I think that was sort of the times when I think the founder of when New Harvest just was born, James Matthew, I think, started it, and it was yeah, people didn't really know the direction or what was going to happen, but there were some studies and papers showing that it's going to take between 30 to 50 years for anything to really happen. I think there were three specific things: media development for these hormones and other really growth factors. It was cell line, and it was bioreactor design and environmental chamber growth. And all of these things were only used for pharma. And barely even any food applications at the time. So it was still interesting to explore and see what types of advancements that we can make in truly a shoestring budget where yeah, maybe $50 a week to maybe buy some goldfish, buy some inexpensive reagents off eBay and some tools, trying to refurb everything. Yeah, and that was sort of our experience, trying to grow these cells. It was quite difficult. It was, I think, from every 10 experiments, like 8 failed just because of contamination alone. So very difficult to do.
Wow. And I'm glad you brought up a New Harvest, because I was wondering if there was any overlap with, Jason Matheny. And I think that was 2004. So
Yeah, it was just in the beginning when he started it, and it inspired him to push this forward. Then he saw like some research. There was more publications. There were I remember the famous scientist from Amsterdam that came up with the first patents, and there was a little bit of interest, and mostly, from what I remember, it was starting to actually TV shows and science shows started adding cell cultured meat into the plots of their shows. And to me, that was really cool because I never really saw that until some of these studies coming out. I think all these little things might have all contributed to like sparking some imagination. So it's that thing where someone in science fiction wrote something, then someone actually did an experiment to see if it's real, then more people talk about it in media and TV shows, and inspires the next generation to talk about it and do even bigger experiments. And seeing all these developments over the last 20 years were very interesting. So just to call out, I know Colbert was one of the first talk show hosts to talk about it on a segment called Schmeat, which was very interesting. And there was also a really cool comedy show called Better Off Ted that had a very interesting snippet of cell cultured meat as well. So it was really interesting seeing it put into different cultural references.
wow. And do you think if that team that was trying to get funding was able to either get funding or maybe even get investor funding to start a company, do you think that the world of cultured meat would be different today?
Yeah, definitely. I think it would have at least de-risked some of the early technologies. It's just a truly brute force types of technologies that have to be developed. So it's just tens of thousands of experiments with maybe a little bit of success, and then another 10,000 experiments to make sure what you're seeing is real and not like an artifact or something else. So it's just a very long and tedious process to figure out what cells could be used for meat or what types of foods and environments they like. And it just takes an obscene amount of man hours and technology to figure out. But if it would have had a decade more of work on into it, we probably would have already had some advancement of meat in some restaurants in the United States already. So we think, from maybe talking with some others in the field, it's probably going to be about 2025 to 2026 before we see some consistent restaurants offering some cell cultured meat for sale.
Well, this is definitely exciting. And throughout the week, we've had submissions about beer for space application, truffles in space and all that kind of things. So why is it important that you think, or do you think it's important that we should be discussing kind of food in space specifically?
Absolutely. One of the things about space is everything has to be grown, made, or shipped there. And thinking about sustainability and ways that people could reuse ingredients from the local environment to make more food, more healthy food, is such a fundamental key mindset for space travel. And by thinking about how to create food systems in space, many of these technologies have very clear and we think superior outcomes to maybe some legacy systems and technologies that were basically built to rely on cheap water, cheap nutrients, and other variables. Thinking about how something could be scaled using renewable water, renewable minerals, and renewable energy is such a critical part to actually scaling up this technology. If it's not scalable, it's not going to be widely deployable. So we think by experimenting in space, some technologies could already be validated in more challenging environments, and we think that can allow some of the scientific risk to be taken off the table. And I think it's beneficial for the whole industry to show that it could be done.
Wow. Well, it's always a pleasure speaking with you, Alan, and you're definitely there's a wealth of knowledge here to discuss. Do you have any last insights for kind of, attendees as we close out the show?
Oh yeah. We all know we're in trouble. It's going to be probably the hottest year in human history. So everyone take big swings because we need a lot of them.
Excellent. Alan, thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, Alex. Thanks, everyone. Take care.